Good evening, and welcome to POW, our Power of Women series, a program of women's philanthropy. I'm Amy Einhorn, and along with my event co-chair, Jill Morris-Boardman, we'd like to thank you for joining us. As we look forward to Hanukkah next week, I am proud to be part of a community that is dedicated to sharing the light and supporting our local and global Jewish community, no matter what challenges we face. Together, we are building a better and safer world for all of us. On behalf of our Federation, I want to recognize and thank the Women's Philanthropy Outreach and Engagement Chairs, Amy Wayne Garnitz and Adina Kleinman, the Women's Philanthropy Campaign Chairs, Adrienne Goldberg, Danielle Wild, and Becky Heller, and our Women's Philanthropy Chair, Jennifer Korak. We are also honored to welcome professionals Roma Cullen and Ginny Galili, as well as Janice Nagel from our partner agencies, Belfair JCB and Jewish Family Service Association, who are on the front lines serving families in need every day. Thank you for all that you do. The opioid epidemic is on the rise. Experts say more than 2 million Americans have abused prescription painkillers, pain pills, and street drugs. That includes legal painkillers like morphine, oxycodone, and hydrocodone, prescribed by doctors for acute and chronic pain, as well as illegal drugs like heroin. Last year, in Cuyahoga County alone, more than 540 people fatally overdosed on opioids. The county medical examiner's office estimates that number could be upwards of 800 people by the end of this year. The Jewish Federation of Cleveland's annual campaign for Jewish needs financially supports many vital services to address clients caught in the grip of this epidemic. This includes resources from the agencies we just referenced, Belfair and Jewish Family Service. While our POW events usually incorporate a hands-on service component, this evening's focus is on education and advocacy so that we may be resources to others. It is also about action. Thank you to those of you who participated in our prescription drug take-back initiative by bringing your prescription drugs in to be safely disposed. This effort helps to avoid misuse and promote safety. Please remember and share with others that you can take medication at any time to local police stations. I don't know about you, but I brought in 4 vials of just, oxycodone and other things from my home. Tammy Kaplan brought in all sorts of other medication, which was quite smart, but I only read the line and did exactly what it said. But you can take other medications as well if you're worried about the safety, so please remember that. It is now my privilege to introduce our first speaker, Cheryl Hirsch. Cheryl is the Assistant Director of the Siegel Lifelong Learning Program at Case Western Reserve University. Tonight, she will share her personal story of how the opioid epidemic affected her family. Cheryl hopes that her work will help create change in the way our country understands and addresses mental health and addiction. Cheryl, thank you for giving a voice to this tragedy and helping us understand that it could happen to any one of us. Your strength and perseverance is inspiring and will change the conversation. Of that, I am sure. Please help me welcome Cheryl to the podium.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Thank you, Amy, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, Federation, for inviting me here this evening to speak. Most importantly, thank you to everyone here for being here this evening. We're all here tonight to support the power of women, and we do have the power together to make a difference, even with this opioid epidemic. Behind me is a slide with some staggering numbers. These numbers show the effect the opioid crisis has had on our community, our state, and our country. We all remember how awful 9/11 was and how many people died that day. The whole country came together to support and help each other. Now we're looking at those same death tolls, 2,996 people are dying every 3 days in this country. And yet, it seems not enough is being done to help this epidemic. If people in any city, state, or country were dying at this rate, we would be doing everything we could to get educated on the disease and to do all we could to help the problem. But because of the stigma that surrounds addiction, most of us close our eyes. Maybe we whisper at a friend's funeral with an assumption of how the person passed away. And we don't openly talk about it at our kitchen tables or in our workplaces. This is a disease, and it needs to be discussed. I have 2 important messages tonight to share with you. One is to be sure that you all understand exactly what our Jewish Federation of Cleveland does for our community. And secondly, it's to be sure you fully understand the impact of this epidemic, the people affected by it, and the impact that it does have on our community. The Jewish Federation of Cleveland is the only Jewish organization in Cleveland that considers the needs of our community as a whole and plans for its future. Sadly, the opioid epidemic in Cuyahoga County is on the rise. Our federation is working hard with local partner agencies like Belfair JCB and the Jewish Family Service Association to ensure the vibrancy and vitality of our community members. By supporting the Federation's annual campaign for Jewish needs, we are providing funds to our agencies to keep our community healthy, safe, and strong. One of the campaign's key priorities in the year ahead is to aspire to leave no one behind. The Jewish Federation of Cleveland helps people in need during times of crisis, no matter who or where they are, putting values into action every single day. Let's begin with a little exercise. When you think of the word addict, the person, how do you visualize them? And when you think of the word addiction, how do you define it? Perhaps you think of this mother's picture that was all over the news several months ago, or someone who may look like this. Would your thoughts be, they're a loser, they have a weakness, they're in turmoil, maybe they're homeless, or it's just a failing? Now look at this photo. This is the same woman as in the previous one, in the car. She's now in recovery. She has visitation with her child and is trying and working towards full custody and full recovery. Recovery does happen. In 1965, the Surgeon General began all messaging on cigarette packs and ceased all cigarette advertising in 1970. In spite of all these warnings, how many of you can remember a relative or friend dying from emphysema or lung cancer and lighting a cigarette in the hospital? Maybe you were still smoking while you were pregnant, despite all these warnings. How many friends or family members do you know that tried to quit smoking? How many people got tipsy at a celebration and it made you uncomfortable because it happened so much, but you didn't say anything? And when that person tried to quit smoking, did it take more than once, twice, several times before they were able to quit and be successful? And what about the heart patient or diabetic that doesn't lose weight and doesn't exercise, but they keep taking their medication, which helps them get by? And I think we've all suffered a headache or two on Yom Kippur. That comes from our withdrawal of caffeine. All of these are types of addictions. Some are fatal, some are not. But all are addictions, and addiction is a disease. Doctors treat a lung cancer patient or chronic smoker even though they still smoke. Cardiologists have placed more than one stent or done more than one bypass on a heart patient, even though the patient has not started dieting or exercising. We don't always follow our doctor's treatment plan, but we're never told, don't bother coming back, you'll only do it again. When you leave here tonight, if I leave you with one thought, it should be that I changed your mind in how you think about an addict, and understand that just like any other disease, treatment and medication should be available to them, no matter how many times they come back for help. Now comes the tough part, my personal story. I practiced hoping not to cry too much, but you'll forgive me if there's a few tears. This is my daughter. You'll note that in the bottom left-hand corner, she's with her aunt in North Carolina. And in the top corner, she's with her brother in what became her last birthday celebration. Both these photos are taken in 2012. I now know she was already using heroin at this time. Does this look like the other photos that I just showed you? I don't think this is what you would picture when you thought of an addict at the beginning of the talk. Melissa passed away from a heroin overdose 4 years ago. She was my daughter, a loving sister, a granddaughter, a niece, a cousin, and a friend. She was sweet, loving, and cherished by all that knew her. And for that reason, those are the words that are on her headstone. At the age of 18, with migraines 24/7, Melissa went off to The Ohio State University. She was hoping to be a pediatric physical therapist and become a true Buckeye. Melissa lasted 1 year at Ohio State, leaving with a 3.8 GPA. But her social life did suffer because of the pain that she suffered always. She transferred the following year to Cleveland State University to be home near me and the doctors. When she was here in Cleveland, she worked for 2 families as a nanny and part-time at the Siegel College Library, and went to classes. She was always my perpetual motion child. It was hard to keep her down, and she was determined to be successful. No one really knew about Melissa's pain. Melissa was always cheerful and smiling, and she tried to live her life as best she could. She hated giving in to her pain, and she hated complaining about it. She had drive and could have done anything she wanted. Due to her pain, realizing she might have a difficult time getting through 6 years of school for physical therapy, she transferred in the fall of 2011 to a 2-year program at the University of Cincinnati with her boyfriend. She ended up coming home that December, wanting to come off the OxyContin that she had been prescribed for and was on it for over 2 years. Her boyfriend had been taking some of her medication, I had come to find out, and was using it for his own pain, but also to get high. Melissa entered into a pain treatment program to deal with the migraine pain and the withdrawal. One day that winter of 2012, I sat calmly in a therapist's office with Melissa. I used the word junkie that day, and Melissa started to cry. and yelled at me. "Ema, I'm not a junkie," she said, "and I never was. I was taking a medication prescribed by my doctor. Now I'm going off it, and I will learn to deal with my pain." She was so angry at the notion that I could think of her as a junkie. I never did really think of her that way, but I wanted to scare her a little, because we all can imagine the images that the word junkie conjures up in our minds. That spring 2012, she went back to school to try to finish in Cincinnati with her boyfriend, against my better judgment. But she was 22, and we've all been there. She was very headstrong. He was a Jewish boy. He had some difficult family issues to conquer, and he also had enrolled in a detox program. When they got back to Cincinnati for several months, they did quite well together. They continued to go to their 12-step programs and their classes. But Melissa's pain was still there. From what I know, on one really bad day, he said, "I'll get you something to help the pain." He came back with heroin. I'm not sure how she started using it, whether she was smoking it or snorting it, but I can tell you when she died, she was injecting it. After not doing very well in Cincinnati, for obvious reasons, she came back home that summer to Cleveland. When I picked her up, the apartment was a mess, and he seemed to be gone. I told Melissa that she could come home, but she had to agree to stay away from him and some other old high school friends that I felt were trouble. She agreed with this and had no problem, and came home and reconnected with some old elementary school friends that she knew from Solon. She went to a few Cleveland Hillel programs and continued to meet new people and establish good relationships. She met a new young man who we liked very much. He was courteous, driven, and took very good care of Melissa. So life seemed good, and none of us, even her boyfriend, had any idea she was using heroin. Melissa was seeing a therapist and was prescribed Suboxone. She told me that the Suboxone was for a pain medication that she had gone off of, the Oxycontin. And that's all I knew. Around March 2013, I thought she had changed a little, becoming a little more despondent and out of it, although she did keep working and driving and taking care of those children that she was a nanny to. Her boyfriend had noticed a change as well and told me about it. I confronted Melissa, thinking she was back on painkillers, but knowing the cost on the street, I couldn't imagine how she was paying for them. She denied that she was using anything and told me that it was just the stress of school and her pain. But definitely, there was a change in her attitude. In the beginning of May 2013, she said to me, "Ema, I am working with my therapist, and I'm almost ready to talk to you about what's been wrong. Just not yet." I told her I hoped it would be soon, because I really felt like I was losing my sweet little girl, and I wanted our close relationship back again. She said she did as well. On May 9th, 2013, I was home with the flu. I got up that morning with my husband, Denny, for some coffee. Melissa's boyfriend had spent the night. He got up as well and was getting ready for work. Melissa woke up early too, which was very unusual, and we all ended up having breakfast together. And it was that morning that Melissa said, "Emma, what would you like to do for Mother's Day? I'm going to spend the whole day with you." We hadn't done that in quite a while, so I was sort of looking forward to it. Both men left for work. I let Melissa know I was going to lay down for a little while, but to come up and give me a kiss before she left for the day. My sister called me around 10:45. I was surprised that Melissa had not woken me up yet to say goodbye, so I headed down the stairs. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I could see into her room. Melissa was slumped over on her bed in a pool of vomit. I screamed. I told my sister that I needed to call 911 and that she needed to call Denny, my husband, right away. That day and the following days became a blur of commotion, and some of that still is. Melissa died that day at the hospital from an accidental overdose. I didn't find out she had taken heroin until I was at the hospital. I didn't find out that she still had ongoing relationships with those old high school friends until that day either. Melissa passed away on Thursday, May 9th, 2013, and was buried on Sunday, Mother's Day, 2013. In a way, I guess we did end up spending the day together, just not the way we had intended. It is and will remain the worst day of my life, and one that I continue to replay in my mind over and over again. People think I'm so strong for speaking out. Tears don't show that I'm so strong. It's not strength. It's a choice to do the best you can with the hand that is dealt to you. And I truly and firmly believe that. And Melissa would not have wanted to die in vain. She would have wanted me to help anyone I could and leave a legacy of her behind. I also have a lot of faith in a greater power above. And I believe Melissa and others before me are all there guiding me. And I still say, Lila Tov, and I love you every night. Now let me ask you, have you changed the way you think about an addict or define the word addiction? The true definition comes from a Latin word and literally means to surrender one's self and to be a slave to. In an article that my son shared with me, a daughter who was an addict tried to explain her addiction to her mother in a text. Drugs are like a cruel mistress. They are jealous and don't want you to have anything in your life aside from them. They slowly start to chip away at the things that matter most. Perhaps this can help you see what drugs do to a person. And now you can think of an addict as a person with an illness, a person, another human being that just needs help. Now maybe you will realize that this epidemic is attacking our Jewish community and the community at large. It is a disease that has no socioeconomic, religious, or race-related boundaries. Open your eyes and your hearts and realize that an addict can be your child, your parent, or your spouse in your family, or in your neighborhood. Addicts are people that need our help, not punishment. Our neighbors, friends, and family in our Jewish community and beyond, who need our love and support, not disdain or hate. Our liturgy helps us through our more difficult times and teaches us how we should live our lives and to accept others as they are, with their disabilities and flaws. That we not only have permission, but an obligation to pray with the Avaryanim, the transgressors or the fallen. For no true community excludes those who have stumbled and fallen. We are obligated to pick up the fallen and help them, not shut them out. Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sazov, the great Hasidic sage, once said, "I never really understood the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself until I overheard two people having a conversation. 'Do you love me?' said the first. 'Yes, I love you very much,' said the second. 'Really?' exclaimed the first. 'Do you know what I'm lacking?' 'How would I know that?' replied the second, to which the first person responded, 'If you don't know what I'm lacking, how could you possibly think you love me?' Rabbi Sazov says that these two friends taught him that to know the needs of people and to bear the burden of their struggle, that is the true love of humanity. Rabbi Eliezer entered the study hall and taught, "A person should always be as pliant or as flexible as the reed, never as hard as the cedar. And for this reason, it is the reed that merited that of being made a pen for the writing of the Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzot." Melissa and I used to talk about me being her guiding light and always with her. Now, because of a cruel turn of events, she has become my guiding light. And one thing that also guides me on my journey is a line from a Siddur. "Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away." I now share Melissa's love in the NICU at Metro Hospital as I rock the babies there. And I share her energy at every meeting I attend to help this epidemic. Wouldn't our world be a much better place if all of us took the love of those that were no longer with us physically and shared it with those that need a little extra help? So now I say to you, Lech Lecha, go, literally, go for you. Go into yourself, go for yourself, and for others that need your help. Recognize that our challenges are not weaknesses. They are what help us grow, what allow us to flourish and appreciate joy, and they are what allow us to develop into our best selves. May we all have the opportunity to face our challenges and come out the other side with a greater sense of self and purpose. My hope is that when you see that next news story about an overdose victim in a car, maybe leaving a child behind, that you feel not only for the child, but for the victim, and understand the hold this disease can have on a person, even a mother, and realize how much help that person needed. Realize that they didn't want to leave a child behind. They didn't choose to be an addict, but they couldn't help themselves. and maybe they didn't have anyone else that cared. Maybe you can care. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. We admire your strength and appreciate your sharing your story. If you have helped one person tonight, you have helped all of us. As a community, we aspire to leave no one behind. I am pleased to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Joan Papp. Dr. Papp is an emergency medicine physician at Metro Health and a nationally recognized authority on opioid abuse. She is also the founder and medical director of Project Dawn, Deaths Avoided with Naloxone, an overdose education and naloxone distribution program. Please help me welcome Dr. Joan Papp.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today. And thank you, Cheryl, for your story. It's truly an honor to have the opportunity to speak with all of you. I would also just like to acknowledge and say thank you to Carol Rendon for inviting me here, and also for her own role in addressing the opioid crisis. Carol has been a remarkable leader in the community, both as the U.S. Attorney and as now a community leader. Her vision in developing the U.S. Attorney's Task Force and our newly formed hospital consortium is the primary means by which we are addressing the opioid epidemic in our community now. As for myself, as she mentioned, an emergency physician at Metro Health, and I've been practicing there since 2007. I am the director of our overdose prevention program, Project Dawn, which delivers overdose education to both family members and drug users on how to recognize and prevent opioid overdoses. And my new role started in July of 2017, and at Metro Health, I have taken on the responsibility of developing and leading the Office of Opioid Safety at our institution. My commitment comes not only from managing hundreds of patients in our emergency department suffering from opioid use and overdoses, but also learning firsthand the frustration of trying to help my own loved ones within my family who have also struggled with addiction. It seems nowadays all of us are touched by this. I think most of us here in this room have been touched in some way. It seems you can't turn on the television or the radio or open up a newspaper any day of the week without hearing about the opioid epidemic and how it's destroying our community. To get just a sense, is that better? Okay. To get just a sense of the scope of this epidemic, imagine filling First Energy Stadium. That is the number of people in our community in Cuyahoga County that are misusing or abusing opioid prescription pain medications. Now, if you draw from First Energy Stadium and you take those folks who are misusing and abusing prescription painkillers and you fill Quicken Loans Arena, now you have the number of people in Cuyahoga County who are going to transition from prescription painkillers to heroin every year. Now, if you take those people who are abusing heroin from Quicken Loans Arena and now you fill two 727 airliners, one of those airliners will be filled with the number of people who died in 2015 from heroin, and another with the people who are going to die or who have passed in 2015 from fentanyl. In 2016, you could fill 2 jumbo jet 747 airliners with the number of people who died from heroin and fentanyl, or over 600 people in Cuyahoga County alone. And to really put that in perspective, in 2007, we only had 40 overdose deaths from heroin. But to understand really where we are today, I think it's important to first just take a step back and look at how we got here. As Cheryl mentioned, with her daughter, it started in a doctor's office. And as a physician, my colleagues and I struggle every day trying to manage patients who have chronic pain. And sometimes we feel desperate to relieve their suffering. But despite this, until about the mid-1990s, we reserved the powerful opioid drugs for patients with terminal cancer. But all that changed after the pharmaceutical industry became more active and began to exert their influence over the regulatory agencies that govern hospitals and the behavior of doctors. Institutions like the Joint Commission and the Federation of State Medical Boards began to influence doctors' behaviors and, in fact, mandated that we take a more aggressive approach to treating pain. This change in regulation, coupled with false information from the drug companies about the addictiveness and safety of these drugs, led to the opioid crisis that we're now facing. But unfortunately, if that were the whole story, we'd be in a much better situation. But it didn't end there. As physicians, we wisened up and we realized that our patients were becoming addicted to these painkillers and were starting to suffer the consequences and to overdose, and many of them were starting to die. And so we did what we thought was best, and that was to stop prescribing prescription painkillers. But we did so, unfortunately, without a plan for the patient's recovery. And patients were often fired by their doctors because they were misusing or abusing their drugs. They were drug seeking, and they were turned away and stranded without any resources to get help for their addiction because we really didn't understand the nature of addiction. And so what did they do? They didn't stop using the drugs. They turned to the street, first to buy prescription painkillers. Heroin came later as those prescription painkillers became too expensive and less available. Heroin was the first drug that people would turn to, and now as this epidemic has grown, we've seen that drug replaced with fentanyl. And fentanyl is now the top killer in Cuyahoga County from illicit opioid use. And in 2017, our medical examiner projects that we're going to see over 700 heroin and fentanyl deaths this year. That's 14 times the total deaths we had just a decade ago. And about half of these deaths occur in suburbs just like mine and just like yours. So how can we begin to fix this problem? Our only hope is if our community works together. It takes all of the stakeholders, not only state, local, federal government, but members of the criminal justice system, police officers, judges, the medical community, and community members like all of you. And in Northeast Ohio, we have been working collaboratively since 2013 to find some solutions. We've worked through the U.S. Attorney's Office, through our heroin task force, our newly founded hospital consortium, and at Metro Health through our Office of Opioid Safety. And so I'd like to take the next few moments to walk you through the approach that we've been taking in Northeast Ohio and the goals of our organizations and what our approach has been to tackle this crisis. First, our U.S. Attorney's Task Force, founded by both Carol Rendon and her predecessor, Steve Dettelbach, founded in 2013 to address the crisis. It began with a community conference on heroin that was open to the public and was followed by development of a community action plan, a very detailed plan to address all facets of the crisis with all of the stakeholders' input. And for the past 5 years, we have spent our time carrying out the goals of this action plan. Our goals are carried out through 3 focused subcommittees, one in law enforcement, one dedicated to treatment and policy development, and another through education. The Law Enforcement Committee leads efforts throughout the criminal justice system, such as training law enforcement officers on things like investigating drug overdose scenes, working with Cleveland Police to connect patients who have had overdoses directly to treatment, and working with our naloxone distribution program to educate police officers on how to respond to an overdose. What do you do when somebody's having an overdose in front of you? And we've trained numerous police officers throughout the county to administer naloxone and safely respond to an overdose victim. And as a result, we have more police departments in the state of Ohio administering naloxone and carrying naloxone than any other part of our state. Next, our Treatment and Policy Subcommittee leads advocacy efforts to change laws to address the crisis throughout the state. As you can imagine, as this epidemic has changed and developed, our laws needed to change and develop to catch up with them and to address the crisis. Our role has been to educate lawmakers on how policy can improve outcomes for our patients, and at times we work with lawmakers to help edit and draft some of those legislation so we can get good laws that work and make changes in our patients' lives. Some examples of these policy changes include increased access to naloxone, allowing family members to have access to the drug, and to allow pharmacists to dispense the drug behind the counter without a prescription. We've also worked with lawmakers to pass mandatory rules that clinicians have to check a pharmacy database called the ORS database so that we can find out if a patient is getting prescriptions from multiple providers. We've also worked with lawmakers and the medical board to help limit the number of pills that a patient can get for acute pain. So no longer are the days that you go to the emergency department or to an urgent care and get a prescription for 60 pills when maybe only all you need is 6 or 8. And the last policy subcommittee of our heroin task force is education. And the members of our heroin task force through the U.S. Attorney's Office have led more educational events just like this one here tonight throughout the community. Literally hundreds of educational events, not only in the community, but also throughout high schools. Nearly every high school in Cuyahoga County has been addressed by one of our members to warn kids about the dangers of heroin and opiate abuse. Our members have also worked with local media outlets to develop the campaign that you may be familiar with, the Know the Risk campaign. You'll probably see on billboards, if you haven't in the past, radio and television outlets. They've even done live stunts downtown to raise awareness of exactly how dangerous this opioid epidemic is. And I meant to bring some buttons, but in my haste to get out the door today, I unfortunately left them, so I apologize. An outgrowth of our U.S. Attorney's Task Force has been the development of something called the Hospital Consortium. Now, it's important and vital for all of the community to come together, and that's what our task force through the U.S. Attorney's Department does. However, it's even more important that the hospitals work together, because it's up to us, the understanding that hospitals are the ones who are not only going to identify the patients who have drug use disorders, but also the ones who can prevent more people from becoming addicted and can provide treatment when overdoses are happening and when opioid use disorder is identified. So all of the CEOs from all of the Cuyahoga County hospitals came together early this year, sat down and wrote out a plan for what hospitals can do to address the crisis better. We have developed an action plan and are working through a newly hired executive who is going to work with all the hospitals individually to help carry out the plan to address the crisis. Improve things like physician education so that doctors have a better sense of how opioids should be prescribed and how to recognize opioid use disorder, and when is it appropriate to prescribe naloxone along with pain medication. So these are some of the things that we're working on, and I think that we're going to see some really great things come out of this hospital consortium over the next year. Still very early, so we've got a lot to look forward to. Lastly, I want to talk to you about a new office at Metro Health, and that's the Office of Opioid Safety. This is a office that we've developed at our hospital to essentially educate the community, educate our hospital and our patients on safer opioid use in the community and in the hospital, and also work together with the community on advocacy issues and also expand our treatment in the hospital. We started our efforts in this area with Project Dawn in 2013. Project Dawn stands for Deaths Avoided with Naloxone, and it's Metro Health's opioid overdose and overdose prevention program. We were founded in 2013 to educate first at-risk opioid users, and as we developed, we were later able to provide access to naloxone to family members and anyone who may be in a position to rescue a person who's overdosing on opioids. Naloxone is the antidote to opioid overdose. It's the same drug that we use in the hospital that paramedics use when they're responding to an overdose. It rapidly wakes a person up and saves their life, restores their breathing. Our program is available in 5 walk-in sites throughout the county. In our emergency department, available behind the counter in all of our retail pharmacies at Metro Health. And as a result of our program, we have given out over 8,000 naloxone kits in 5 years, and we have reversed over 1,200 overdoses. So 1,200 lives that we've saved that we know of. That's one part of our Office of Opioid Safety. The second piece, and probably the most important, is our campaign to increase education throughout the hospital. We're working with providers to teach them safer opioid use, educating them on their own prescribing practices, making sure that they have a sense of where they fit in among their peers. We give them data on how they're prescribing compared to others in their department, so that they have a sense of, you know, what am I doing that's similar or different to my peers, and allows them to alter their practices. We also are able to use this process to identify doctors who may be prescribing in a manner that is not safe. And we work with those providers and we teach them safer practices and develop plans with them so that they can improve the safety of their patients. Another part of our mission is to do educational events like we're doing today. Not only working with folks from the community, but also other members from the medical community, educating doctors, nurses, and others in the community. And lastly, our goal through the Office of Opioid Safety is to increase access to treatment. It's so vital that our patients have access to scientifically studied, scientifically proven treatment programs. And for us, that is an outpatient medication-assisted treatment program that provides both naltrexone and medication-assisted treatment with Suboxone. We are also working with our community to, through some grants that we have received, to develop quick response teams out in the community. So we're working with law enforcement to go out to overdose scenes and work with the overdose victims and get them connected to treatment, whether that means treatment at Metro Health or whether that means treatment at another site as well. And then lastly, we are the medical provider for the county jail. And that's a really unique and wonderful opportunity to intervene on a very, very high-risk population. In fact, about 25% of the people in the county jail are addicted to opioids. And we have a grant that allows us to work with those folks to help connect them to treatment. But we still have a lot of work ahead of us, and it can seem overwhelming at times to keep fighting this epidemic when we know that the deaths continue to rise. After dedicating the past 5 years of my life to this crisis, sometimes it really can seem like we're not we don't really have a whole lot to show for it. But I think rather than get disheartened, it's important to focus on the individual lives that we have saved and the individual lives that we have changed and that we have shown compassion to, and the people that we have connected to treatment. And so I just want to leave you with some things that I think that perhaps each individual can do. And I think educating yourself is one of the most vital pieces. Sharing your knowledge with others, and then taking the next step by volunteering, dedicating time, writing and calling your state representative. All of those things can help to address the opioid crisis. Cuddling with babies in the NICU, all of those things are going to go a long way to helping us fight this epidemic. And you can even come out and work at Project Dawn and put together naloxone kits. But this crisis is simply too big for one person or one group to do it alone. And so we need all of your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Papp. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to us and share your expertise. Our final guest speaker is Roma Cullen, the Director of SAY, Social Advocates for Youth at Belfair JCB. SAY provides programs and support throughout Greater Cleveland to help prevent and reduce the use of alcohol, prescription drugs, and other drugs, as well as reduce the incidence of social and behavioral health problems such as teen violence, depression, and suicide. Please help me welcome Chris to the podium.
Hi, and thank you all so much for inviting me to come and talk to you tonight about SAY. As she mentioned, SAY stands for Social Advocates for Youth, and we are a prevention program. We're a program of Belfair JCB. I've been fortunate enough to be with the SAY program since it started 17 years ago. The first 13 years I was in a school providing the prevention program directly to the students in the school, and the last 4.5 years I've been in the role as the director of the program. And while SAY provides a lot of different types of prevention services, I'm going to talk to you tonight just really about some of the services that we provide and as it relates to the opioid epidemic. We have begun using a curriculum that's called the Generation RX curriculum. And this curriculum was created by the Ohio State Pharmacy Program. And one of the things that I like about it is that it's a free curriculum. It's available to anybody online. You do not have to be a mental health provider or a teacher to use this curriculum. Anybody can learn the curriculum and teach it. We actually have begun teaching high school students to use the curriculum so that they can then teach younger age children about medication safety. And this curriculum also has lessons for people all the way from elementary age children up through senior citizens. and obviously the lessons are different based on the population. And also the Generation RX curriculum is not about street drugs, it's not about heroin, it's about prescription medication, not specifically even pain medication, but just safe prescription medication usage. So we have begun using the elementary curriculum and then the middle and high school curriculum. And as you can see from this, the elementary curriculum is really very basic. It's very basic things that children need to know, that they should only take medicines that are given to them by a known and trusted adult, that medication should be kept in a safe place out of the reach of children. And that oftentimes, and I think this is really important, that oftentimes medication and candy look a lot alike, and therefore medication should not be stored in something other than the original container that it comes in. And I actually had an example where this came up with a couple years ago. A neighbor boy of mine, who was probably about 8 or 9 at the time, was at a friend's house, and they found a baggie of gummy bears, and they proceeded to eat the baggie of gummy bears. And lo and behold, they weren't just gummy bears, they were children's vitamins. Now, fortunately, after the parents called poison control, they found out that they had not eaten enough to be a toxic level, and the boys were fine. But you can see that if they had been something else, and really in today's, in Ohio with, legal marijuana coming our way in the form of edibles, it could have been something else. So the elementary curriculum teaches children about simple medication safety principles. The middle and high school curriculum teaches them about, again about safe medication principles. It talks a lot about not sharing your medicines with your friends or with anybody else. You don't take a pill that a friend offers to you. You don't give your medicine to a friend. It also moves into key skills to turn down invitations, so good resistance skills, how to say no. And then it talks a lot about positive alternative coping strategies, stress management, and about the importance of having good relationships with trusted adults, people that you can talk to if you need to. So that's just a little bit about that curriculum. And now, fortunately, we, in the schools where we work, we really are not seeing a lot of high school students who are using or misusing prescription drugs or drugs like heroin. And that's the really good news. But then again, we know that even a little bit of misuse can be very dangerous and deadly. So even that little bit is something that we need to address. What we are seeing, sadly, is that students, after they leave high school, in their early 20s, as Cheryl's story clearly demonstrated, are at much greater risk. And so we believe that it's really important that while we have students in high school, they're sort of a captive audience. They're in our schools and they're in our homes, and that's our opportunity to teach them, to give them the knowledge they need to make good decisions about drug use, and to teach them the kind of positive coping skills that they'll need later in life to be able to say no and to have the right information that they need. And I will say, too, that while we are not seeing a lot of teenagers who are misusing prescription drugs or heroin, the drugs that our teenagers are using, and it's no surprise, are alcohol and marijuana. And, in today's crisis that we're dealing with here, we do hear an awful lot about prescription drugs and opiate epidemic, and with good reason. It's important and we need to. But we can't overlook the fact that alcohol and marijuana are dangerous drugs for teenagers. They're dangerous for many reasons, and one reason is that they are a gateway drug. And we see that over and over and over again. And teenagers who begin using alcohol and marijuana when they're teenagers are at much greater risk later in life to develop addiction than teenagers who do not begin using those substances when they're teenagers. They're also dangerous because we know that alcohol alone kills more teenagers every year than all other drugs combined. So we often think about alcohol as, it's not so bad, it's legal. But for teenagers, it's a very dangerous drug, and more teenagers die from alcohol than any other drug. So, and with prevention, prevention is one of these things that I think as parents and maybe as educators, sometimes we like to be able to say, okay, check, we did that. We had that lesson, we had that talk, we're done, we can move on to something else. But what we know about prevention is that prevention, in order to be effective, people need to hear the message repeated multiple times. It's sort of like you don't have the sex talk with your teenager. You have a series of ongoing conversations, and that's how the message gets across. And so prevention has to be repeated multiple times. It has to be repeated in different kinds of formats. It needs to be maybe a classroom presentation, something that they see in the media, something they see in social media, something they read. It has to come across in different types of formats, and it has to come across in different places. So home, school, community, we're all responsible. We all have a role to play in the prevention of adolescents engaging in risky behaviors. And those messages need to be consistent. It's really hard for teenagers if they're hearing one thing at school and another thing at home. So for instance, maybe a teenager hears in their health class that marijuana and alcohol are dangerous. And then they hear at home that, well, they're not so bad, and we did it when we were kids and that sort of thing. So it becomes a very confusing message. So the messages need to be repeated, and they need to be consistent across the board and across the different places. And then finally, parents' role in prevention, and it just can't be understated or overstated. The parents are the number one influence in their teenagers' decisions about using substances, and this is a message that SAY preaches about all the time, and any opportunity we can to talk to parents, we're always trying to get this message across. And research shows us that when teenagers believe that their parents believe that using alcohol and drugs are dangerous and harmful, those teenagers also then believe that they're dangerous and harmful. And if they believe those things, they're less likely to use. That doesn't mean they never will, but they're less likely to use. And then also that, parents, I think, sometimes of teenagers forget or they think that their teenagers don't listen to them anymore, or their teenagers tune them out, and that what they say isn't important. But really, peer pressure is a real thing. Kids are influenced by their friends and by their peers, but parent pressure is a real thing too, and it's just as powerful and probably more powerful. So teenagers do listen to what their parents are saying when it comes to alcohol and drugs. So, and finally, I guess I would just say that we give our kids a lot of I think implicit messages about substance use. And when we say things like, well, we all did it when we were kids, or it's sort of a rite of passage, or we know that kids are going to experiment and, we just want you to be safe and that sort of thing. Really, the message we're giving our teenagers then is that it's not so bad, and you expect them to experiment and you expect them to use. And the message they need to hear from parents and people in the community is that we expect you not to do this. But finally, and I guess it's sort of wrap it up maybe on a positive note, is that the majority of teenagers, and we know this from research both locally and nationally, the majority of teenagers are not using substances. The majority of teenagers are not using alcohol, they're not using marijuana, and they're not using more addictive substances like opiates. So we need to get that message across to teenagers. We need to let them know that this is the case, and empower those teenagers who are making good decisions already, because those teenagers then will feel empowered, and they will feel more able to stand up for what they believe, and then that message then spreads to other teenagers to also not use. If they feel like they have to use to fit in, then they're going to use. But if they feel like to fit in, they cannot use, then that sends a whole different message. And again, just lastly, that we know that the longer a teenager delays beginning to use any substances, the less likely they are to become addicted. So our role as prevention providers in the school and in the community is to help impart this message to teenagers and to parents to prevent them from beginning to use substances while they're teenagers. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Your work at Belfair JCB is just one example of the many ways our Jewish community supports those in need. We have some time for a question or two from the audience for any one of our speakers, and there'll be Federation professionals with microphones around. Anybody? I'd actually like to start and ask a question. It could be for either Dr. Papp or for Chris. You referred a few times to the fact that if teens delay using drugs, that they're less likely to become addicted. Can you provide us some more information about that, if that's about brain differences? Then it might be just you.
She left, okay. Well, I am not a doctor or a scientist by any stretch, so I don't want to get too deep into it. But we know that substance use in adolescence affects a person's brain differently than it does in adults. And so we know that when teenagers begin to use, there are changes that happen in their brain, some of them that are not reversible, and then that they are more likely then to develop an addiction. Also, just they learn, they don't learn as good of coping skills, they develop habits and relationships early on that lead them to addiction. Then that coupled with their brain changes, I guess, are the cause of that. But research definitely documents that the earlier a person begins to use, the greater the likelihood that they will become addicted.
I have a question. If we have a friend or we know somebody who's going through this with their child, how do we help? What do we do? What do you suggest?
If you as a parent know of a young person who's struggling in some way, depending on your relationship with that child or that child's parent, I always encourage trying to reach out to that child or to that child's parent and just to have a really honest conversation. I think, this has come up a lot in the schools when we work with students, and myself as a parent, if somebody had a concern about my child, I would want to know. And so frequently, we encourage parents to say, look, I don't know for sure. I can't say for sure, and I'm not casting blame or pointing fingers, but I'm concerned. I'm concerned, and as one parent to another, I would like to know, and so I thought that maybe you would like to know. I think you sort of have that moral obligation to do something, and if you really felt like you couldn't do that, then maybe going through the school or through another source like that would be the better thing to do. But I certainly wouldn't want to just look the other way because there's just too much at risk.
I would add that a parent, talking to another parent, talking to another parent, even though you might be afraid that it's a friend or a neighbor, they're going to get mad at you, I'd rather have a friend never speak to me again and know that I've saved their child's life. Because if they may get angry with you for saying it and think, oh, it couldn't be my kid, how could you think this? But at some point, it's better because they'll question their child. And they may never come back to you and say you helped them, but in your mind, you'll know that you helped them.
And what's the first thing you would suggest they do? What kind of referral would you make?
So there's a list in front of you that Federation has supplied. This paper that's on the table, and that has a list. The Adams Board is on here, the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services. They're wonderful. They really have everything you could possibly need. And there are lots of children resources for young adults right here in Utah.
There's one back there.
You know what, I think I think,
Dr. Papp left.
sorry.
I just wanted to know about the narcotic antagonist you spoke to about the naloxone. If that is available in high schools, like if nurses have training on that, if that is available drug, within a high school, if somebody was having, she spoke to the fact that it has saved so many lives, and that it can bring somebody out of a narcotic, whatever, really quickly. So what's being done about that? Is that in a high school? Are teachers and nurses educated with regard to that?
I can answer a little bit about that. I know that over the summer, the Cuyahoga County Department of Health sent letters to all superintendents throughout the county, informing them about naloxone and that at the school district they could stock naloxone, and that they would administer it as needed with no risk of liability. And so I know that some of our local districts have supplied it, and some of them have chosen not to for various reasons. So it's up to each school district, but they could have it available to them if they want to.
And let me say that as parents, it is your job to tell the school districts what they should and shouldn't do in your mind. So if you think it's important for your school to carry naloxone, or for your school to have dogs that are sniffing drugs out a couple times a year and going and kiss those lockers, you need to make sure that you advocate for the schools and let your school boards know that they should be doing this.
Okay, I think that's everybody. I'm guessing that people will be milling around afterward. Maybe we can, if you have another question, you certainly can seek out one of the professionals that's here with us tonight. And also, please take those resources home with you, because you never know when you're going to need it. My name is Jennifer Korak, and I'm Chair of Women's Philanthropy here at the Federation. I just want to thank you all for being here tonight. Obviously, this is an issue that is very important in our community based on the turnout this evening. So I thank you for your care and concern about this epidemic and for coming and joining us tonight. I personally would like to thank Cheryl and Christine and Dr. Papp for joining us tonight to help us learn a little bit more. Our Power of Women series are really created as part of the Women's Philanthropy Division of the Federation to be a modality for learning for all of us, whether it's about things we do here directly at the Federation or crises that are affecting people in our very own community, and how lucky we are to have your expertise and your bravery. On our behalf, please accept a donation we're making in your honor to Melissa's fund. The Melissa Ray Fund was created in Melissa's memory to support substance abuse programming, promote education and advocacy, leading to greater understanding and change. So thank you. Thank you very much. I know that it's a moment that will stay with me for a long time, so I thank you for your courage.